Chapter 721 Chaos Obelisk by Hydowsgrain. Are the beasts in the basement of the same strength as the beasts I'll have to face in the next floors, or will the difficulty increase drastically from the first floor onwards? Jason muttered out loud, hoping for the former to be the case. He dearly hoped that the artificial intelligence had somehow missed evaluating his strength accurately. But that was unlikely, considering that it had known much more about him and his soul bonds than Jason himself. Nevertheless, he hoped that the artificial intelligence's data about his human bloodline was not up to the mark, which should be the case, owing to the fact that all kinds of primal humans with a low purity should exist. As such, the soul world should be one of a kind. At least, that was what Jason understood from all the information he had acquired during the last few years. There might be another race with a similar soul awakening, maybe even the primal humans themselves, but over the course of time, they must have evolved. Because of that, Jason figured out that it was not even unlikely for specific information about his human bloodline to be missing. Thus, Jason hoped that the fortified soul conjunction, the 100% amplification from soul bonds that occupied his mana core, and the fusion were unknown to the artificial intelligence. If that was the case, he would have much fewer problems to advance through the trials, and even less to survive. With a total of 15 days left, Jason had many things to do. Amongst them, he wanted his soul bonds to continue cultivating inside the soul world. They should advance even if he was unable to. As if on cue, Petri left his mana core and returned to the soul world, where they continued to cultivate. Right now, none of his soul bonds was fully mature, which meant that their cultivation advancement speed was still accelerating. This was exceptional in Jason's opinion, and the effects which the Cricula Minatra flowers had on beasts proved to be icing on the cake. They were ancient flowers that were said to be extinct, yet Jason had been able to procure them, which was extremely helpful. Now that his soul world was also overflowing with the 3 cultivation energies, his soul bonds could cultivate at a rapid speed, increasing their own, and Jason's strength tremendously. While the flowers were no doubt a blessing, Jason could only perceive one downside of this seemingly perfect tactic of allowing his soul bonds to cultivate the lack of soul energy. Right now, he had more than enough soul energy and crystals, but once his soul bonds would reach the higher ranks of the Prisma stage, providing enough soul crystals would become hectic. As such, he had to alter the soul energy cycle within the sub-area of his mind. It was simply too slow, and Jason had already thought of several plans to improve his soul energy cycle. One of them was to divide the single cycle of soul energy into 2 streams. This required double the amount of soul energy, but Jason had more than enough to achieve this for now. In the end, it was even possible to create multiple cycles because his soul world core had reached a size large enough to allow this feat. The only issue was that he didn't know for certain if his sub-area supported the maintenance of multiple soul energy cycles. Jason was not sure if his sub-area could maintain dozens of soul energy cycles, but his mind had been refined several times, he had undergone his bloodline awakening, and many of his minor seals had been released. Adding his cultivation stage that had advanced tremendously, and the fact that his mind was further amplified by Spyro, his spiral spirit to it, Jason was confident in his sub-area being able to control 4 soul energy cycles at once. That was just an assumption, but owing to the understanding of his own body, Jason could be relatively sure that he was not being overly ambitious. Now, he only had to find the time to properly divide the soul energy cycle and adjust the smaller streams of soul energy in order to achieve what he wanted. This sounded easier than it truly was, and would take him quite some time. As such, Giving himself a challenge added to the task he had already received, Jason wanted to complete the alteration of his soul energy cycle before advancing to the first floor of the tower. That meant he had 15 days in order to find the portal, gate, stairs, or whatever would lead him to the first floor while simultaneously adjusting his sub-area. It was not impossible to achieve this, but Jason didn't even know how vast the ground floor was. As such, he first determined the side of the place he was in. After exerting the floating sky movement technique at the perfect mastery, Jason additionally circulated mana through his body, while his Celestia aura and stigma were fully unleashed. Afterward, he began to run in a direction using his full speed, while ignoring the beasts he passed. Jason barely made note of their cultivation base that was also within the Prisma stage's first threshold. Through this, Jason could tell that he would be able to defeat all those beasts, even if some would drain him of more energy to fight than others. Fortunately, he was not actively attacked by any of the beast groups he passed. Instead, they only looked at him in vigilance and interest as if he was an existence they had never seen. This was, in fact, the case because Jason was the individual that activated one of the pitch-black obelisks that spread through all kinds of gathered inheritance sites that could be found on multiple planets. It had a specific requirement to be awakened out of a state that was similar to hibernation, and one of it was the aura of a primordial being or the descendants. Awoken by Jason's advancement to the Prisma stage, the pitch-black obelisk had emerged on Kinra Island, as the first obelisk that had been placed all over the world, especially for those young primordials who lost the goal in front of their eyes. Yet, Jason was not one of them. He was different, and the fact that he awoke the obelisk was something that would change his fate, turning the chaotic tides of the universe for the better or worse. Whether Jason was the universe's doom or its salvation was unknown, and only time could tell the answer. However, what nobody knew was that the dangers lurking inside the endless universe were not everything that endangered countless beings. There was something much bigger, and more dangerous that could obliterate everything and everyone that was hidden from plain sight. While Jason tried to pass the tutorial of the first trial, he didn't know what kind of shockwaves the awakening of the pitch-black obelisk had sent through the vast universe, with 5 particular places being the gathering point of the commotion. One of the 5 places, inside a gigantic palace, surrounded by searing hot magma. Sweating profusely, a fiery red human-like being rushed through the hallways, entering the main gathering hall of the palace, as he exclaimed in between deep breaths. Someone awoke one of the Chaos obelisks, and the being exceeded the difficulty threshold, forcing the sentience within the obelisk to create a higher difficulty, facing a being of enormous height that sat on a large throne made out of the bones of the opponents it had defeated through the course of time. The messenger could barely lift his head, realizing that he had lost his cool in his excitement. Kneeling down, he didn't even notice how the gigantic being turned his head to face him. His deep crimson-colored eyes stared into the soul of the messenger, who had come rushing to him with the news of the Chaos obelisk's awakening, as he asked, "Where?" This seemingly simple question caused the entire palace to shake, and the ground around them fissured as cracks appeared out of nowhere. The messenger, who was at the peak of the Spectre stage, could barely move his lips to answer. Mana. The obelisk on mana was awakened. Lifting his hand in an extremely slow manner, the being that was overflowing with the purest energy and unfathomable strength touched his chin as if he was in deep thought about something. Whose descendant is it? What the being wanted to know was if the descendant who had awoken the Chaos obelisk was one of their own race, or hailed from the others. In response, the messenger could only quiver in fear as he said in a nervous voice, "I do not know that, sir. The transmitted information is defective." The messenger said this and instinctively closed his eyes, awaiting an unbearable punishment, but instead, nothing happened. It was only a minute later that he lifted his head to look up, to see the corner of the unfathomable being's lips rise a little. Interesting. Chapter 722 Endless Tower by Hydalsgrain. Jason didn't have the slightest idea of what commotion he had caused, and his mind was solely focused on finding a way to the first floor as well as the alteration process of his second sub-area. Unfortunately, the former was easier said than done, while the alteration process of his second sub-area was much easier than Jason had estimated. Instead of taking 2 weeks, Jason had easily separated his soul energy cycle into 4 strands, much earlier without burdening his mind too much. This was exceptional, and he could tell that another strand could possibly be created. However, instead of 5, Jason felt that 4 were more than enough for now because it felt as if everything would become more burdensome once the 4 strands had been fully integrated into the subconscious processes in his sub-area. Despite that, he was still able to increase his soul energy production by 4 times, which was an exceptional feat. In the future, this could be further increased, but Jason was unable to even calculate how many soul crystals it would require to bind a single being at the Ascendian stage. Earlier, he had a premonition that this might not work, but the sole thought of his late mother, who seemed to have been much stronger than he had initially expected, made him change his opinion. Thinking about his mother, he wondered how strong she must have been to be forced to shatter her cultivation just to return to Argos. She shouldn't have had enough time to enter the Spectre stage. As such, she should have been at the Ascendian stage. This was much weaker than Jason had previously expected, but at the same time, the Chaos Emperor, or whatever kind of mythical being's soul fraction was imprinted into his body, had to be much stronger. He had only heard from the mythical being that his mother had helped it with something, and in return for the favor, it had sealed a portion of its soul within Jason. With that in mind, Jason understood that his mother might not have been strong based on her cultivation stage, but she had definitely been a strong woman. Thinking about his mother in that way made him proud, and even if she was dead, he wanted to make her proud in any way possible. Clenching his fist in determination, Jason spent the remaining days on finding the path to the next floor. Oddly enough, he didn't have to fight a single beast, which was quite satisfying because Jason had some time to sort his mind. Every single notification of the robotic voice was still ringing through his head, and to make sense of all of this, Jason truly required time to concentrate without worrying about anything else. 3 days before the countdown would end, Jason finally found what he had been looking for. It was a large gate in the middle of nowhere, and he wondered how he hadn't been able to perceive it before. However, it was only then that realization struck Jason because the gate was perfectly concealed, and not a single bit of energy was radiating from it. This shocked him a little bit because every material, object, and living being that was exposed to mana, primordial energy, or spirit force would be swept through by the respective energy after some time, even if it was only faint. That meant the gate's concealment was perfect, which Jason had never seen before. Even with his Emperor eyes, he was unable to see through the concealment, and for a moment he believed that the gate was just an ordinary gate, made out of material that repelled the 3 energies. Yet, only a moment after he thought this, the gate opened magically, releasing tremendous amounts of energy. Jason's Emperor eyes could almost immediately tell that the mana intertwined in the blue liquid that manifested within the gate's frame was transmuted by spatial energy. Under normal circumstances, one would simply want to walk through the gate, thinking that it was the path towards the first floor, but Jason did no such thing. Entering a defensive stance, his eyes turned serious while Petri entered his mana core, amplifying his physical strength tremendously. Without Jason realizing, Petri had just completed the construction of his first solidified prismarine crystal, indicating his advancement to the Prisma stage. Feeling his soul bond's energy surging through his body, Jason felt eerily calm as the muscular body of a 5-meter-tall beast emerged from the portal. Its fur was brown and the hooves of the half-bull half-human beast caused the ground to tremble, as the beast roared out loudly. "A Minotaur? Is that supposed to be the Guardian?" Jason mumbled while staring at the Minotaur that was the strongest beast he had seen on the ground floor, until now. Its cultivation base was still at the Prisma stage's first threshold, but it had 7 prismarine crystals solidified within its body. At the same time, its physique seemed to have received an additional enhancement. As such, Jason could tell that it was a mutated Minotaur, with an advantageous physical mutation. Yet, instead of being flustered, Jason simply smiled as his golden eyes gleamed brightly. Maybe it's finally time to have some fun once again. Despite having only 1 prismarine crystal, Jason didn't think that he was at a disadvantage. Rather, looking at Byakhor, before taking a glance at the extremely heavy longsword which the Minotaur was holding, Jason couldn't help but think that Byakhor was still much better. While his soul weapon lost in terms of quality, the soul connection still allowed Jason to have the upper hand in terms of overall capabilities as it gained many benefits. Unfortunately, he was still aware of the fact that he would have to improve Byakhor's efficiency soon or exchange it with a better weapon. His speed of improvement was simply too fast, after all. However, for now, this could be ignored. Instead, Jason didn't hesitate a single moment as he faced the Minotaur, telling Petri to fuse with him. This was not necessary for his opinion, but there was something he wanted to test out: how high his pure, physical strength could become by utilizing all means to enhance it. Thus, a black armor of scales that had a golden vein-like pattern all over it, grew on his skin, while a 7-meter-long tail grew from his coccyx. Clenching his fist, he heard faint noises, and Jason couldn't help but smile vibrantly behind the mask of scales that covered his entire body. He didn't even think about using his curses, or anything else than his physical strength, as he rushed towards the Minotaur, as small cracks appeared on the ground below him. Through his unique prismarine crystal, the tremendous advancement his physique underwent by unsealing more than 20 minor seals, Petri's physical enhancement and fusion, Jason's strength and speed overwhelmed that of the Minotaur as he emerged in front of it. The Minotaur had already charged towards Jason, yet, it didn't expect Jason's entire being to turn so terrifying the moment it rushed in his direction. As such, the moment it slashed out with its heavy longsword, it had already lost the fight, owing to the velocity at which Jason swung Byakhor. In the end, Jason's choice of weapon, speed, and strength had been enough to inflict several lethal injuries before the longsword brushed past him, missing Jason by a hair's breadth. It took the Minotaur a few seconds to realize what had just happened, as its body began to bleed, slowly depriving it of the life force within. The moment the Minotaur collapsed, Byakhor returned to the soul world, while Jason's fusion with Petri started to dissolve. "That was short, but still a good way to know how strong I am," Jason mumbled with a satisfied smile, only to add to his mind. "I hope the difficulty of the following floors won't have much difference to that of the ground floor." With that thought, Jason used the remaining days that were left to pass the first task, to cultivate and finish sorting his thoughts. He entered the gate on the 14th day, advancing to the tower's first floor. Only a moment later, the much-awaited robotic voice announced in his head. "Congratulations on passing the ground level of the Endless Tower. Good luck in the following floors. 1. Time left to advance the floors of the Endless Tower: 1Y, 364D, 23H, 59M, 59S. Remark: Placid behavior of beasts has been removed. Chapter 723 Surrounded by Hideousgrain. What the? Why do I get so much time to pass the first trial? Are you fucking kidding me? 2 years. So I either advance floors during that time or do whatever I want. Is that how it is? Jason couldn't believe himself as the robotic voice resounded in his mind. Having entered the first floor, the voice disappeared, and Jason realized this soon after. As such, he forced himself to calm down, before he made sense of the situation. I really won't be able to leave the dungeon anytime soon, even if I advance through the floors with a breathtaking speed. Is that how it is? Jason wondered, and even if he wanted to fail the first trial, it would take him 2 years to get out of it. This period was too long to waste doing nothing, and Jason understood this quickly. At the same time, it was also obvious that the immortal eye he had purchased for Luna wouldn't be handed out in the next few years. If the first trial already takes 2 years, won't the other trials take similarly long? Jason only got 20 years recently, but now he was supposed to stay inside a dungeon, for years at that. It felt weird, but he was not exactly displeased. There was only one thing that bothered him, which Jason didn't expect. It was not the fact that Luna wouldn't receive the immortal eye from him, because that was something the others could fulfill too. Instead, Jason was sad about not seeing Jennifer for such a long time. I hope I can reach her through the messenger card, or she will be in Lanro when I return, otherwise, it will be difficult to meet her again. He was still not sure what the emotions within him exactly were, but Jason had to be stupid to not understand that Jennifer had become extremely important to him. While he didn't know when exactly this had happened, Jason could only shake his head before sighing deeply as he emerged on the first floor. The information about the negation of the placid behavior of the beasts inside the dungeon bothered Jason, but he didn't think too much of it first. Unfortunately, it was exactly the placid behavior of beasts that had allowed Jason to pass through the ground floor without much resistance. Upon emerging on the first floor, Jason first noticed that the environment was extremely similar to that of the previous floor. As such, he was already familiar with it and didn't require too much time to understand everything clearly. However, the biggest change that differentiated the ground and the first floor was something that Jason had to face only moments after he emerged on it. A small group of 3 Triceratops that followed the path of Prior was suddenly charging at him, making the ground tremble due to their tremendous weight. They rushed towards him with the speed of a high-velocity train. Turning around, Jason saw the 3 Prior beasts, whose eyes had a slight tinge of a crimson color. This made him doubt the situation, but without further hesitation, Jason exerted the floating sky movement technique before circulating large amounts of mana through his body. Catapulting himself towards the Triceratops, Jason summoned Byakuur, which he enveloped in Solaris flame only a moment later. Afterward, he used a small amount of mana to use his 2 curses, and even the abyssal effect, with which he targeted the closest Triceratops that was also the strongest one. Weakening it with a subtle paralyzation made it almost stumble as it lost its balance. At that moment, Jason emerged below its head as his body leaned forward, almost reaching the ground. This was already a risky position, considering that the front legs of the Triceratops were only a few centimeters away from his head. Yet, without a single trace of fear, Jason twisted his body, while swinging Byakuur around in a smooth arc, targeting the unprotected parts of the Triceratops' head, the lower part of its neck. Because he made use of many unique properties of his at once, Jason had been able to behead the Triceratops without encountering a single issue. Meanwhile, the other 2 Triceratops witnessed what Jason did, only to attack him even more fiercely that gleamed in their eyes. Unfortunately, it was exactly this behavior that caused them to be reckless, and they ended just like their brethren a few moments later. Jason took a deep breath when he finished off the 3rd and last Prior Triceratops before looking at their corpses. If the dungeon expects me to store away tens of thousand beasts, it is truly stupid, but I cannot simply waste the corpses, he thought, realizing that the next 2 years would be filled with blood and death. Sighing deeply, Jason stored away from the first corpse, and he was just about to store the rest, only to witness them disintegrate into countless particles. This shocked him greatly, but only a moment later, he smiled lightly. The corpse I stored away is still there, so the dungeon just doesn't want to see the corpses being wasted either, I suppose. Jason was not sure if his assumption was correct, but in the end, it didn't really matter. More important was the fact that the Triceratops had been ferocious, even though they were known for being calm and friendly as long as one didn't bother them. Thus, Jason didn't need much to comprehend that the negated placid behavior was not everything that seemed to have been tweaked to increase the difficulty level. Instead of becoming neutral, the placid behavior of the herbivores seemed to have been replaced with a ferociousness Jason didn't expect. Yet, this didn't seem to be bad. At least, Jason felt as if the Triceratops hadn't been able to fight properly owing to the forced change in their natural behavior. At the same time, they had been unable to think calmly, let alone use their entire strength, which was likely to be based on the recklessness with which they fought. Because of that, Jason thought that the removal of placid behavior might not be as bad as he had first imagined. However, it was exactly this assumption that was completely wrong, and while Jason had been deep in his own world of thoughts, many things were happening inside the first floor. Only a few minutes had passed since Jason emerged on the first floor, but a second and third group of beasts was already approaching him. They ignored each other, despite being predator and prey, solely focusing on Jason as if he was the only existence they saw. It was at this moment that Jason understood something. Not only their behavior changed, but I was also turned into the sole target of their ferociousness. With his new understanding, Jason was able to reevaluate the dangers of the first floor, and everything became clear to his mind. The cultivation base of the beasts inside the first floor was not different compared to the basement. Yet, at the same time, their strength had changed tremendously, while the same occurred to the dangers within the first floor. Fighting the groups of beasts one after another could not be considered to be an issue. Rather, it was relatively easily done owing to Jason's current strength. However, the biggest problem was the fact that his fight was attracting the attention of other beast groups that would attack him, and no one else. The Velociraptors and Parasaur did not even realize that the other group had appeared in front of Jason, who had just finished the fight against the Triceratops group. So, it's like that, he thought, and his lip curled upwards, forgetting about the time he would have to spend inside the first trials. This will be interesting. Chapter 724 Ferocious First Trail by Hideousgrain. Defeating the two beast groups that rushed at him with a fast speed was not problematic, and Jason killed them with smooth slashes and thrusts of his sword. However, he noticed that the commotion he created was beginning to attract a horde of beasts, increasing his problems much more than initially expected. As such, the moment he defeated the last beasts, Jason fled from the battlefield, in an attempt to escape the clutches of even more beasts lunging at him. A quick backward glance made him see 4 small beast groups charging at the spot he had previously been, proving his previous assumption to be correct. They really got attracted to the loud commotion, but only focused on fighting me. These 4 groups of beasts don't even think about killing each other. Seeing how the beasts were looking around, trying to find him, Jason just shook his head before he continued to run further away from them. It was not a cowardly act of turning his back to danger, but there was no need to be reckless. He could, of course, defeat them, but that would require careful planning and strategy. Mindlessly diving in the melee would do him little good and only increase the risk of getting killed or heavily injured. During the fight, he would create a loud commotion, and even more beast groups would get attracted to the noise to charge at him. If that were to happen, Jason would slowly end up in an encirclement of beasts that would only continue to grow until every beast of the first floor would have surrounded him. That was something Jason didn't want to happen, so his mind worked furiously to create a small, yet efficient plan. Being able to fight one beast group before leaving would be the best scenario, but Jason was not sure how feasible it was if another group of beasts were to be nearby. In that case, they might as well pursue him, creating an even louder commotion than a normal fight would. That was not unlikely to happen, and Jason tried to make up his mind and put together the best possible plan that allowed him to clear the first floor. Yet, at the same time, he thought of a plan B that would allow him to advance through the floors without worrying about the surrounding beasts. However, after thinking about the second plan, Jason shook his head because even though it would be the most secure plan to initiate, it felt wrong and cowardly. Torn between the two plans, Jason couldn't help but sigh. His first plan was to rush through the floors by solely focusing on killing the Guardian before advancing to the next floor. The first plan could turn extremely dangerous, which was not something Jason wanted to occur. Unfortunately, something about his second plan seemed to be wrong too, except the fact that it was cowardly, yet the most logical. He wanted to extinguish every single beast on the first floor before cultivating for several months, only to advance afterward. This was logical, but at the same time, Jason felt that something was odd. Nevertheless, he had to avert his attention to his surroundings in order to prevent being found and attacked by other beasts. Instead of being attacked, Jason wanted to be the aggressor because it gave him a great advantage that might even allow him to silently kill an entire group of beasts before continuing to advance. Given the time limit of 2 years to advance through the tower's floors, Jason didn't want to be too hurried, but he also didn't want to waste his precious time. If he used his time well, he should also be rewarded accordingly. Thus, with that in mind, Jason let Petri occupy his mana core, preventing the cursed basilisk from continuing his cultivation progress. Nonetheless, Petri had enough time to finish the cultivation procedure without receiving an injury, as it would normally be the case if one were to forcefully interrupt one's cultivation. With his physical strength that advanced tremendously, Jason rushed through the first floor, attacking all kinds of beasts ruthlessly, killing them without showing any mercy. Several days passed like this, and his fights seemed to go on for hours at a time, blurring the difference between day and night. Before he knew it, he had killed all of the beasts. This was easier than he had expected, but Jason also knew that the first floor was the easiest of all. At least, that was what common sense told him, and once the floor had been cleared of all beasts, Jason approached the seemingly ordinary gate. Just like the ground floor, the gate opened when Jason was barely a few meters away from it, revealing a portal with a beast emerging from it. This time, it was a flying beast that followed the path of Marist. It had a light affinity and looked like a gigantic, white eagle that had a wingspan of more than 20 meters. Jason was not really shocked about the beast in front of him, as it only had 7 solidified prismarine crystals. This was not a worrisome fact for him, and the only thing he had to pay attention to was the light affinity. Every other characteristic of Jason was much stronger than the gigantic light eagle. Solaris gave Jason his strongest affinity, the black flame, but even that was at most comparable to a common affinity whose capabilities were strengthened owing to 3, at most 4 solidified prismarine crystals. Fortunately, this disadvantage didn't seem to be that much of a problem because his physique was strong enough to balance it out. At the same time, Solaris flames had unique effects that only required to inflict a small injury on his opponent, which would render the opponent unable to do anything else as the flames burned through every kind of being that was unable to extinguish flames within their body. Exerting the floating sky movement technique, Jason emerged in front of the gigantic light eagle, the moment it emerged out of the portal. Brandishing Byakuya that had just manifested in his hand, Jason quickly thrust it forward, not giving it enough time to react and evade the attack. As such, his eyes fused with Petri's, increasing the effect of the race-specific weakening and petrification curse that forcefully subdued the eagle for a fraction of a second. This fraction of a second was more than enough for Jason's slash to hit the gigantic light eagle. Yet, instead of being able to end the eagle's life with a single strike, Jason was barely able to inflict a severe injury in its right wing as it suddenly released a large margin of its light affinity, the moment it could move again. Jason had already expected the gigantic light eagle to retaliate, but he had expected to create a shield of light, not that it would forcefully change his slash's trajectory with its affinity. Additionally, Jason was dazzled by the bright light of the beast's affinity, forcing him to switch his position instantaneously because he predicted to be attacked a moment later. Thus, he jumped into the air, which he shouldn't have done. Oddly enough, the gigantic light eagle seemed to have predicted his prediction as light spears shot towards Jason just a quarter of a second after he had jumped into the air. From the looks of it, the gigantic light eagle had no similarity whatsoever to both the Minotaur he fought earlier, and all the ferocious beasts that fought without using their mind, recklessly attacking him. The eagle's constitution seemed to be enhanced, just like the Minotaur's, but in the eagle's situation, it was the intelligence or foretelling ability that was exceptional. As such, Jason had much more issues in fighting the eagle than previously assumed. Nevertheless, it was already severely injured, and unable to fly because one of its wings had been rendered useless after Jason's attack. Unfortunately, Jason hadn't enveloped Byakuya in Solaris Black Flame at that time, otherwise, Jason would have been more confident in defeating the gigantic light eagle in a short amount of time. Yet, the injury it had sustained was enough for Jason to believe that it wouldn't take him long to defeat it, as long as he evaded all of the attacks by predicting their trajectory. This was crucial because it was impossible for him to be faster than the light spears that were being shot towards him. So, is that how the entire first trial will look like? Jason mumbled, breathing heavily the moment he had evaded the light spears in the air, using a vast majority of his mana. He had underestimated his opponent while overestimating himself, which made him end up in the current situation. As such, he told him that he will completely fuse with Petri before fighting the Guardian on any of the following floors. At the same time, Jason finished his fusion with Petri midair. This transformed his appearance entirely as he unleashed his Celestia aura that was intertwined with Petri's wildness and his unrestricted desire to eradicate the gigantic light eagle. Chapter 725 Bonus Merits by Hideousgrain. With black scales growing on his skin, and his pupils transforming into slits like that of reptiles, Jason's entire being turned more ferocious. The same applied to his aura that was eager to devour the gigantic light eagle and feast on its blood. Petri's stigma had manifested above Jason's, increasing its effects by a large margin. Through this, the mana that coursed through Jason enhanced his speed further, giving him the ability to evade the second batch of light spears that were thrown at him. In the end, the gigantic light eagle's strongest ability was not that it could fly, but its great control over its own light affinity. Even Jason had to acknowledge that. However, this didn't mean that he would sit idle and let the eagle harm or even kill him. Rather, it caused his aura to flare up as he received an adrenaline rush, increasing his excitement to fight further. His life was not yet under great risk, and the foes he had fought in the past had been much more dangerous than the gigantic Light Eagle. As such, Jason could take the fight lightly if he wanted to. Yet, that was not how he would choose to fight. Instead, he would give his best to defeat his opponent as quickly as possible, avoiding unnecessary trouble that could occur by wasting too much time. With a large amount of mana inserted into his Emperor eyes, he could clearly detect the light spear's trajectory, evading them easily owing to the physical strength and flexibility he attained by fusing with Petri. Afterward, he pushed his feet and the long tail that had grown out of his coccyx from the ground the moment he landed on it. Through this, he catapulted himself towards the gigantic Light Eagle that had already conjured more than a dozen new light spears and shot all of them towards Jason. In an attempt to evade him to avoid being pushed backward, or possibly injured, Jason leaned his body forward, twisting his body at an odd angle. Jason even used his tail to bash it into the ground, forcefully propelling himself into the air. This helped him evade 3 light spears that had almost hit him. His body leaned forward, and almost touched the ground, evading the spears that had predicted his movement. The eagle was taken aback to see Jason deftly evade all of its attacks, thus it was not prepared for his counterattack, let alone the fact that his entire being was suddenly clad in an additional layer of a black armor. Solaris had emerged from the soul world, tightly enveloping his entire body along with Byakuya that had enlarged to 3 meters. The moment Jason brandished Byakuya at the eagle, it prepared to retaliate using the same tactic as before, only to witness something it hadn't in their first clash. Jason had used a much larger amount of mana to activate the abyssal effect of his Emperor Eyes, in addition to the passive enhancement of the Chaos attribute he had just annexed. There was not much of it left, but the Chaos attribute was still potent enough to enhance his abyssal effect tremendously, even without being used up, simply by remaining stored. As such, the eagle entered the seemingly endless darkness his abyssal effect could create. Even if it was only for half a second, it was enough to give Jason the momentum to pierce Byakuya through the eagle's chest. A moment later, Solaris flame flared up, burning the eagle from inside out, slowly depriving it of its life force, ending its life even faster than the lethal injury. It didn't take long for the gigantic Light Eagle to die, as it succumbed to the injuries caused by Jason's flames searing through its bone and flesh, screeching in pain in a last-ditch effort to survive. In the end, it was for naught, but that was how nature worked, and Jason understood this. However, at the same time, he couldn't do anything against the fact that he wanted to advance the tower in order to not waste his time. And in order to advance through the tower's flaws, he had to kill the beasts that attacked him. Hiding away was not something he would do if it was avoidable, and the rewards he was likely to receive were most certainly good enough to make up for the dangers he had to face. In the end, every single being strived for power, and Jason was just like them. In order to protect himself and everyone who was close to him, he had to be stronger than those trying to harm him. Furthermore, Jason had yet to figure out if his grandparents were alive, let alone find them. As such, he would have to search through multiple worlds, with the biggest clue being the mysterious Chaos Emperor whose soul fraction was imprinted within him. There were too many mysteries around Jason, and he had yet to find out the truth about most. However, at the same time, he wouldn't be able to do that without the necessary strength, which forced him to find more treasures, including conquering the dungeon, and reap all possible benefits. Shaking his head, Jason tried to change his train of thoughts as he mumbled to himself. I'm still thinking too much about killing. Is that what makes me human, and stronger, or is it a weakness? Jason was not sure of the answer, but he tried to distract himself by focusing on dissolving the fusion with Petri and retracting the Celestia aura and stigma. Afterward, the Eagle corpse disintegrated into countless particles which Jason saw owing to the Emperor eyes, only to witness that the particles were pulled into the gate that began to glow faintly. The engravings on the gate were silver in color, but Jason could also see a sliver of faint blue in it. He had no idea what this could mean and could only make assumptions. Yet, all of them were proven wrong only a day later. Because he had been fighting for days on end, Jason recuperated his strength during the following hours, only to rest a little bit after his mana core was filled and his tension finally released. This allowed him to see minute changes in the engravings on the gate, which made him curious. The silver color was slowly fading, being replaced by the blue hue. At the same time, he got the feeling that it would be better to enter the gate before the engravings turned completely blue. There was no reason for this, but Jason just followed his instincts, and the moment he entered the portal, he understood that his instincts had been proven correct. First floor has been successfully cleared. 1 merit point has been rewarded. 2 bonus merit points have been rewarded. 100% bonus of reward for being unscathed. 100% bonus of reward for clearing speed. So, the color of the engravings indicate how much time I have left to receive the speed bonuses. Jason asked himself while waiting to emerge on the second floor. At the same time, he was confused about the being unscathed bonus. In fact, he had been hit by quite a few attacks, and even if they had barely grazed him, he had a few scratches on his arms and legs. As such, the unscathed bonus shouldn't have been given to him. Except if the meaning of being unscathed was different than Jason assumed it to be. How could Jason know that Primordials interpreted the word unscathed completely differently than he did, and that their meaning was much more horrifying than he could yet imagine? Chapter 726 Rushed by Hideousgrain. After emerging on the second floor, Jason stretched his body, while trying to put together the intel he received just a few moments ago. The number of merit points he received was more important than one thought, and Jason had learned of their use after being rewarded with lots of them when he had been inside the temple inheritance site. As such, he wanted to maximize the number of merit points he could get inside the first trial. Passing gives me 1 and being unscathed, and fast enough gives me a bonus of 100% each. That means if I pass the exam just before the gate turns blue, I should still be within the time limit for the bonus. With that in mind, Jason wanted to put together the best possible plan in order to advance through the tower's floor, without the need to neglect his cultivation or other things. Thus, he had to acquire more intel first. Because of that, Jason's first task was to find the gate leading towards the second floor. He had to figure out the requirements to open the gate, in the first place, and there might be other requirements too. Thinking about that, Jason spent 5 days adventuring through the second floor, while trying to avoid being attacked by ferocious beasts. The first trial was filled with beasts that were thirsting for his blood, but Jason felt that the second floor had roughly the same difficulty as the first one. This intel was also important, and it gave him a lot to think about, in order to tweak his plan if required. Thus, he could think about adjusting the time he spent somewhere and the time he required to pass a floor. With a marginal increase in the floor's difficulty, spending a week to advance might be enough for his soul bonds to balance out the increase of difficulty in the following floors. However, that was just a naive thought and Jason knew it quite well. From his point of view, the difficulty would increase by a minuscule amount on every normal floor, only to increase drastically every 5th or 10th floor. That was, at least, what Jason thought to be logical. However, instead of speculating, he had to figure out the truth beforehand. As such, When Jason found the closed gate that led towards the third floor, he approached it immediately. To his astonishment, the gate didn't behave as Jason had assumed, and instead of remaining closed with specific requirements that had to be fulfilled, it instantly opened. A sky blue wolf was revealed that had a height of 5 meters. It was a Marist beast once again and had a strong ice affinity that seemed to have enhanced freezing properties. Jason could tell this because he had seen the same through his Emperor eyes a few times before when he and Artemis had been fused. As such, he knew that the enhanced freezing property was extremely powerful and that it was not to be underestimated. Yet, before the sky blue wolf was even able to fully emerge from the portal that had manifested only a few moments after the gate had revealed itself, Jason had already slid below it with a complete change in his entire demeanor and appearance. The moment the gate opened, Jason didn't even want to give the opponent enough time to take a single breath, let alone take a good look around. As such, the moment the gate opened, he had acted instinctively. Fusing with Petri, Jason shot towards the gate while black scales with golden vein-like patterns grew on his entire body. At the same time, his Celestia aura turned more ferocious, while a second stigma manifested on top of his own stigma. The floating sky movement technique was fully exerted and Byakuur had already manifested in his hand. Just as Petri's scales covered his entire body, Jason's reptilian eyes changed and a tail grew out of his coccyx. Meanwhile, Solaris manifested itself around the black scales armor, and Byakuur. Through this, Jason received a double-layered protection armor that was highly resistant to physical and elemental attacks, with additional destructive properties owing to the searing hot flames of Solaris. However, his defenses were not important right now, rather his attack would make him win the battle. With that in mind, he had already emerged in front of the sky blue wolf the moment it had just emerged, oblivious to the position of its opponent. Thus, Jason, who had the time on his side, utilized his battle intent that intertwined the race-specific weakening curse, the petrification curse, and the abyssal effect which he released at once. Subduing the oblivious sky blue wolf, Jason didn't hesitate a single moment before he propelled himself into the air, beheading the beast before it could even react. He didn't hesitate a single second, and seeing the blood splurting through the air, a faint gleam emerged in his golden eyes, only to disappear a moment later. His plan had worked perfectly and the guardian of the second floor didn't even notice that anything had gone wrong as it met its death. Moments later, Jason returned to his normal appearance before taking a deep breath. Unfortunately, I don't feel like it will be that easy every time. In the end, the fight might have looked extremely easy to win, but the amount of mana Jason had used was 3/4 of his entire stored mana. That might seem feasible for most, but Jason was also aware that his victory had been possible because he had taken the sky blue wolf by surprise. As such, the moment he attacked another guardian in the same way without the surprise effect, it would probably fail. There were too many unknown variables Jason had to pay attention to, and he only attacked the sky blue wolf because of one particular reason: information. Without wasting his time, Jason had wanted to procure more information about the tower, the floors, and to be precise, the entire first trial. After the sky blue wolf had been killed, it dispersed into countless particles that were absorbed by the gate that began to glow brightly. The silver color of the engravings was extremely vibrant, and Jason could already figure out the first piece of information he had been curious about. If I'm not wrong, there is no reward above the 100% bonus for speed. That's good to know. Because there didn't seem to be a greater reward for speed, Jason was able to spend more time clearing the dungeon before starting to peacefully cultivate for a few days. This would be extremely helpful in order to become stronger, balancing out the steadily increasing difficulty levels with each subsequent floor that were bound to occur. Jason's mind was already rattling wildly, and he tried to make a rough estimate on how much time he had to finish each floor. Yet, what confused him was that the silver color seemed to be fading much faster than it did before. Just at that moment, Jason was forcefully dragged out of his thoughts as Petri, Spyro and Solaris issued a loud warning. Within a split second, he turned around as black wings sprouted out of his back. Jason pushed himself instinctively into the air away from the gate. Through this, he evaded the attack of a pack of Netherworld saber-toothed tigers that had attempted to assassinate him. For a short moment, Jason had forgotten that there were other beasts that would attack him the moment they saw him. Luckily, he had saved himself from the ambush owing to his Soulbond's warning. His expression turned serious and he decimated the group of saber-toothed tigers within the following 5 minutes. This caused a loud commotion once again, and Jason couldn't help but get a little frustrated because he could already tell that the next batch of beasts was about to come. Yet, a moment later, the beast corpses disintegrated into countless particles that were also drawn towards the gate. Like before, it began to glow lightly as the blue color was retracted, replaced by a silver touch. The silver color may be a timer. And the particles increase the time I have. Does that mean by killing beasts I can increase the time in order to receive the speed bonus? Chapter 727 to 10th floor by Hideousgrain. With the new information in hand, Jason used the next 3 days to clear the beasts from the second floor before he spent an entire week cultivating. This was not enough to construct the second solidified prismarine crystal, and it would take at least 3 more weeks of fully focused cultivation. Because of that, Jason advanced to the 3rd and 4th floor, killing all beasts first before doing the same to the Guardians. Afterward, he would only enter the next floor, just before he would stop receiving the speed bonus. Through this, Jason could cultivate while receiving all possible bonuses, which was exactly what he wanted. In the end, entering the 5th floor took him an entire month, but it was definitely worth it because the second solidified prismarine crystal was finally created. With that, Jason's combat prowess almost doubled in an instant, and he knew that he could further increase the speed at which he enhanced. However, that was only something Jason realized after advancing to the 5th floor. The increase in difficulty he had expected turned out to be minuscule, and it was mostly the Guardian that had become stronger. Yet, Jason's increase in strength was much higher than that of the Guardians because not only his own strength had been enhanced, but that of his Soulbonds received a boost too. Spyro's spirit veins had fully recuperated, and owing to the enormous amount of spirit force and the spiral Cricula Manatra flowers that had been planted inside his soul world, it had already reached the 8th lick stage. Meanwhile, Petri was relentlessly absorbing primordial energy in order to liquefy and solidify it afterward. Artemis would still need some time to evolve, but Jason was already awaiting it eagerly. He assumed that his soul energy and the number of soul crystals he would have accumulated until then would be enough. As such, they would be able to advance through the tower at a much faster pace after her evolution was completed. Jason could wait for her to finish evolving while cultivating, but that wouldn't be interesting because the opponents from the 5th to the 9th floor were not really a threat. In a single month, Jason had cleared these 5 floors, only to realize that he had been too excited to fight again. Thus, he had forgotten to focus on cultivating in the time he had in hand before the speed bonus would have worn off. Nevertheless, Jason couldn't complain. From the 5th floor onwards, the base reward increased to 1.5 merit points, which meant that he received a total of 4.5 merit points for every floor he cleared. This was exceptional, but before Jason realized it, he was already standing in front of the gate that had faint silver engravings all around it. Yet, at the same time, there was something that bothered him a little bit. Before, there were no clues about the next floor's dangers, but now there was the skull of a human-like being engraved in the center of the gate. If that was not a warning, Jason was not sure what else he was supposed to think. As such, he realized that he had to pay attention to what he was doing on the 10th floor. However, instead of being frightened, Jason realized that the dangers of the tower had gradually decreased with each subsequent floor. That was not how it was ought to be according to the danger level which the artificial intelligence had assigned beforehand. Not only was he facing the highest difficulty level of the entire dungeon, but, in fact, the dungeon had created a new difficulty level just for him. Because of that, Jason had been worried beforehand, only to overcome the basement level and the first 9 floors of the tower without any real issues. In the end, he had spent more than 2 months inside the dungeon, yet, it felt as if he had just entered it. At the same time, he was yet to witness the overwhelming strength of his opponents that the artificial intelligence had mentioned. Instead, the common beasts he faced were weaker than him, while the Guardian had barely been on par with his prowess. And that was before he solidified his second prismarine crystal. As such, the skull on the 10th floor should either be an exaggeration or a symbol of true dangers, which was the way Jason perceived it. It should be dangerous, but owing to his combat prowess that exceeded the peak of the Prisma stage's first threshold, he was confident of defeating the Guardian on the 10th floor. And even if he was too weak to defeat the Guardian, the common beasts shouldn't be strong enough to survive his onslaught. NHI's combat prowess was too high, after all. It was unlikely that the common beasts had reached the peak of the Prisma stage's first threshold, while the possibility of them advancing to the initial stage of the second threshold was infinitely small, but not zero. As such, Jason couldn't help but feel his hands tremble in excitement as he entered the portal that led him to the 10th floor. Within no time, he emerged on a plain with bluish flourishing grass and extremely dense mana that permeated the surrounding area. Meanwhile, the primordial energy and spiral force were much lower in comparison, which astonished Jason a little bit. Before, there had never been a difference between the amount, purity, and density of the 3 energies, but that seemed to have changed now. With that amount of mana, I wouldn't even need a single cultivation stone to reach my highest cultivation speed. Jason thought, only to sense something from the corner of his eye. It was only a moment later that a barrage of icicles shot towards him, almost killing him the moment he emerged out of the portal. Fortunately, his Emperor eyes had sensed the mana fluctuations from more than a kilometer away, giving him the required time to duck and lay flat on the ground before constructing a gigantic wall of ice himself. The last time he used his ice affinity was quite some time ago, and he couldn't help notice that it had become much weaker than it had been before. Yet, what Jason had to understand was that his affinities were not becoming weaker, but that his strength and the opponents he faced were becoming too strong. Every few months, Jason could solidify 1 prismarine crystal that had the same potency as 4 common solidified crystals. That was simply an insane feat and not something others were able to achieve under normal circumstances. In the end, it was something that belonged to the Celestia race's innate traits, which Jason didn't know for sure. NHE simply believed that all stronger races could do what he did, but that was not the case, at all. Some had unique cultivation techniques with which they could compress and liquefy their mana to a much higher extent. Yet, Jason didn't even require such a cultivation technique, because his bloodline was forcing him to liquefy mana to a much higher extent, while the solidification process was intertwined with the faint traces of the divine energy he used. However, right now, this didn't matter because Jason understood that he had underestimated the 10th floor's dangers. That was not difficult to realize when he saw a total of more than 10 jackals that had each 8 solidified prismarine crystals within their mana core. This astonished Jason because the jackal's strength was on par with the guardian of the previous floor. With that intel, Jason realized that the dangers of the 10th floor were obviously much higher, and he was eager to encounter the guardian. However, first, he had to defeat the jackals that had almost killed him the moment he emerged from the portal. Chapter 728 Greed by Hideousgrain. A slow smile crept up his face when he saw the 10 jackals facing him. His combat prowess was further enhanced by Petri, who occupied his mana core, and his own physique was equivalent to the strength received by the reinforcement of a solidified prismarine crystal. As such, Jason was powerful enough to overwhelm the jackals without any issues. There was not even the need for him to use his Emperor Eyes, the curses he harbored, or anything else to defeat the jackals that were astonished by Jason's strength. They had underestimated him and hadn't expected him to be stronger than they could handle. Yet, before they could even realize what was going on, he had emerged in front of them, killing them without showing any mercy. During the last 2 months alone, Jason had killed much more than 1,000 beasts at the Prisma stage. Previously, he had felt some remorse after killing them, but this sensation had slowly dispersed, replaced by the thought that the beasts inside the tower would attack him even if he wouldn't, either way. His mindset slowly adjusted to feeling anything except the determination to advance through the tower, and Jason began to understand that the numbness with which he killed was slowly taking him over. That was bad, at least, if he didn't want to become completely numb to the sensation of killing. He didn't want to transform into a mindless killing machine. Becoming numb to killing was one of the worst things that could happen because emotions like guilt, frustration, sadness, wrath, agony, and so on were extremely important in a fight, and even more emotions were what made him human. Without these emotions, Jason knew that he would become a ruthless executioner, without any thought or logic, which was something he wanted to avoid by all means. Nevertheless, given the dungeon's dangers, he couldn't allow the beasts to survive, as the fight against the floor's guardian might turn out to be extremely fierce. Owing to this, the fight against the guardian would take longer, which would in return mean that a loud commotion would ensue, attracting the attention of other beast groups. In the end, this meant that Jason either had to defeat the guardian quickly or the other ferocious beasts that roamed the floor. With that in mind, Jason started to clear the floor of every single group of beasts, which gave him a rough estimation of their overall strength that had increased tremendously. He already assumed that the difficulty of the 10th floor would increase substantially, but to think that there would be multiple beast groups with each beast having 9 solidified prismarine crystals was beyond Jason's expectations. If the 10th floor already has beasts at the peak of the Prisma stage's first threshold, won't the 20th floor be full of beasts at the second threshold? That was something that bothered Jason because he knew the exact and vast difference between the first and second threshold of the Prisma stage. In the end, the difference in terms of cultivation was only the creation of a large rotating crystal that enveloped 3 small prismarine crystals. Nevertheless, the enhancements of these single rotating crystals were something Jason didn't know yet. He knew that they required several times the mana required by a single prismarine crystal only to be constructed, but that was all he was aware of. Others didn't compare small solidified crystals with the larger rotating crystals, because it was evident who was stronger, and that it was not even questionable. However, these beings didn't have the advantage of a higher compressed and unique cultivation base like Jason, giving him the ability to fight against beings that were much stronger than he was. Thus, he had to find his match soon enough. The 10th floor was much wider than the ones before, and it took Jason almost 10 days just to find and defeat all groups of beasts. Some fights had been easier, some more difficult because more and more beast groups had been attracted by the commotion he created, but in the end, he was still unscathed. Nevertheless, he didn't immediately approach the gate he had found relatively early. Instead, he used his Emperor eyes to take a look at the color of the engravings. On one hand, Jason wanted to receive the speed bonus, but on the other hand, he wanted to be fully prepared for the worst-case scenario. However, if he acted like this every single time dangers loomed around him, he might as well hide like a coward and only face opponents that were weaker than him. Reflecting on his battles so far, he realized that he had fought many stronger opponents than those that were weaker than him in terms of his cultivation base. Yet, this didn't have much of a meaning, if he were to be honest. His peers had never really been a huge threat to him, and he quickly bridged the gap between them after he had been able to cultivate. There might be prodigies of high-ranked races which he didn't encounter until now, but most beings he had faced so far were much older than him. Even Jennifer was several years older than him, and it was only a difference for beasts, who grew up while simultaneously becoming stronger. For them, their age didn't matter, and it was more of the degree of maturity that made a difference in their strength, turning them stronger or weaker. Afterward, it was their racial limit that prevented them from reaching certain thresholds. This restriction didn't seem to exist in the intelligent races because they only required time, the only difference being the duration of time required to cultivate. For some, it would take millennia to reach a certain cultivation stage, while others were faster owing to their talent, background, and opportunities. Yet, in the end, only strength mattered, and Jason had long since realized this even before he left Argos. Because of that, he didn't care about others' age, and was more concerned about the strength others could exhibit. Jason also knew that the thought that had coincidentally flashed through his mind had nothing to do with his current situation, or so he thought. With his talent, he could cultivate at a rapid speed, and his strength could increase tremendously, just in a matter of a few days as long as he and his soul bonds cultivated relentlessly. Due to this unique situation, the dangers of the tower trial could lessen, the more he cultivated, or higher, the more he rushed through the tower. As such, with that thought in mind, Jason was forced to use his brain to figure out the best solution in terms of earning as many merit points as possible. Knowing their value, and given the fact that the dungeon of the primordial descendant was something unique, along with the fact that he would probably never be able to enter it again, Jason had to use this one chance to the fullest. Even if he might be unable to reach the required threshold to receive the main inheritance, this wouldn't matter as long as he was able to use the earned merit points efficiently. Owing to this thought, his mind was running wild, and he spent the following days cultivating as if his life depended on it. How could Jason realize that he opted for the right choice, only to be too full of himself, and greedy because he wanted to receive the speed bonus by all means? As such, before the entire silver engravings were replaced by a blue color, Jason approached the gate, ready to attack the emerging beast at any moment. He had already utilized all means and rushed ahead the moment the gate opened, revealing the portal that was just manifesting, only to emerge in front of the beast that appeared a moment later. Yet, what Jason didn't expect was that the beast seemed to be waiting for him as it stared downwards at him. It was as if it pierced into his soul, and without a moment of hesitation, it brandished a huge longsword with a terrifying speed that shocked Jason to the core. Trying to block the attack with all his might, Jason's eyes widened in shock, realizing that the beast he was facing cultivated in all the three main paths. Merging the three cultivations' energies, its strength exceeded that of Jason's by a large margin, and it was only a moment later that a sting coursed through his soul world. The impact of the sting was so huge that it was immediately transferred to his mind as a faint crack resounded through his head. This sound flashed through his mind, and it took Jason a moment to realize what was going on as he cursed out with a single, shocking thought in his mind. Byakhor is breaking. Chapter 729 Overwhelming Opponent by Hideousgrain. Jason was shocked. Never in his life would he have imagined that the opponent he had to face had such a devastating strength. He had failed to realize the first telltale signs of his trusted weapon, Byakhor, receiving its very first cracks. This was an unbelievable sight, which caused Jason to widen his eyes in shock. Instinctively, he retracted his weapon, allowing it to return to the soul world. This gave the one-eyed giant, the Cyclops, to continue the sword slash with an unfathomable force. Knowing the trajectory, Jason evaded it by a hair's breadth, but before he realized it, the Cyclops landed a solid kick into the abdomen. Flung away, Jason crashed into the ground, more than a dozen meters away from his previous position, only to continue to roll. Gasping for air, Jason felt as if his entire body was shaking, yet, before he could even think, his body reacted instinctively. Pushing himself up from the ground, Solaris wings manifested on his back, and he soared into the air, giving him some time to breathe, just as the Cyclops appeared below him. Its speed was terrifying, and Jason had barely evaded it, which was his fortune. If it had reached him in time, he would have been in a completely different situation by now. 3 cultivation energies and it reached the second threshold. What the fuck? Jason thought the moment he got the time to make an evaluation of his opponent's strength. It was devastating, and it was only a moment after his initial evaluation that he was able to calm down to some extent. No. It's still in the first threshold, and has just started to create the first of 3 large rotating crystals. This find was reassuring, but the rest was definitely not. Byakhor was only slowly recuperating within his soul world, which was one of the advantages of a soul weapon, its regeneration ability. Yet, before the faint cracks on it would be completely healed, at least half a day or, probably more, had to pass. That was not something Jason could afford to give Byakhor to heal right now. To put it bluntly, Jason had a marginal upper hand due to Solaris wings that enabled him to fly around the Cyclops. However, this advantage was short-lived because the Cyclops was preparing something. Jason had a premonition about it, and without hesitation, he manifested several hundred fire needles. He just wanted to target the Cyclops' soul eye and render it blinding, but the moment the fire needles were shot out, Jason understood that it was useless. Solaris might be on the way to create its 3rd solidified prismarine crystal, but there was still a big difference between possessing the strength of 3 prismarine crystals and 9. Furthermore, the Cyclops had the advantage of cultivating in all 3 main paths. Thus, its strength must already be at the 2nd threshold of the Prisma stage. With that in mind, Jason couldn't help but feel a little bit odd because the opponent on the 10th floor shouldn't already be that strong. It simply made no sense considering that he began ascending the floor with a single solidified prismarine crystal. Even if he was a halfling of the Celestia and human race, that didn't mean he was able to do everything. Right now, his chances to win a battle against the Cyclops were close to 0. As such, Jason didn't even feel like attacking the Cyclops, to begin with. There had to be a different way of tackling the beast, and figuring it out was what he had to do right now. Jason was able to come up with several plans owing to the spiral spirit being his soul bond that enhanced his mind. Most of them had to be discarded because they were too dangerous, but one particular plan was stuck in his mind. The gate is open, so I should be able to enter the 11th floor, right? If I manage to leave, I can cultivate before encountering the other guardians. In the end, the plan was simple, and Jason wanted to employ it without hesitation. Yet, he also knew that his speed was too slow. Nevertheless, with the ability to fly, Jason planned to approach the gate slowly. Thus, he released his entire mana at once while flying towards the gate carefully in an attempt to speed through the portal. Unfortunately, his plan shattered into smithereens the moment he realized that the Cyclops didn't remain idle. Instead, its eyes were fixated on Jason from the beginning of the battle, but it was only now that it began to act. Huge streams of energy enveloped the Cyclops, only to gather around its eye that began to release a unique kind of merged energy. At this moment, Jason understood that the Cyclops was using a weird type of special technique. Yet, before Jason could do anything, whether it was desperately attacking or fleeing, his surroundings seemed to twist as the gravitational force increased by several times. Unsure whether it was just his mind that assumed the gravitational force was increasing, or if the Cyclops was pulling him towards it, Jason could only stare at the Cyclops for a confused minute. However, it was crystal clear that he wouldn't be able to continue flying anymore. He was only a few meters away from the portal, but at the same time, this small distance suddenly became too vast to cross for him. Looking down, he noticed that the Cyclops was merely inches away from him, and both the joy and killing intent inside its eyes caused Jason to feel that he couldn't hold back anything anymore. Otherwise, he might die. At that moment, Jason did something he had wanted to prevent at all costs because he could tell that his body was not ready yet. Earlier, he had already unsealed many minor seals, and if it was possible to do that again, he would do it by all means. However, this time it was different. Forcefully releasing another seal, Jason grit his teeth, knowing that this seal was different compared to the ones before. It was not a minor seal, but one of the few bigger seals the Chaos Emperor had put on him. This seal had multiple purposes, but among the most important was the fact that the major seals of the Chaos Emperor prevented the Celestia bloodline from directly merging with and overwhelming Jason's human bloodline. Only because of that, Jason was able to awaken the soul world, in the first place, and it was similar to his humane emotions that wouldn't have existed without the human blood coursing through his veins. As such, the moment Jason broke his seal, the energy that was released almost tore his body apart, as the Celestia bloodline tried to suppress the human bloodline. Yet, before anything like that could happen, the Cyclops seemed to have noticed that something was odd, which caused it to react instinctively. Only a fraction of a second later, Jason's eyes were sprayed with hot blood, his blood. Instinctively looking down, Jason realized that the Cyclops had chopped off his leg using a vast amount of energy to sever through the tidal waves of energy Jason suddenly released. Realizing this, Jason roared out, as his eyes and Celestia aura turned bloody while his mind went blank. Chapter 730 Fight of Instincts by Hideousgrain. His brain abandoned all of the rational thoughts, as he was consumed with nothing but the thought of killing the peasant that had dared to cut off his leg. Jason had yet to truly realize what had happened, but his mind had shut off before the pain could course through his entire body. That was why he had suddenly entered a state that was solely operated by his primal instincts, and nothing else. Crimson red eyes and a bloody red aura that held faint strands of a golden silverish color replaced his earlier calm personality. Jason's entire demeanor and appearance had radically transformed within the blink of an eye. The transformation was still underway as Petri's fusion, which Jason had activated since the beginning of the battle, began to intensify. Amplified by Petri's ferocious nature, and the fact that the basilisk was the king of serpents, who couldn't stomach accepting defeat by any being, let alone the Cyclops in front of them, their rages fueled each other. Through this, their connection intensified, and the armor of scales was growing thicker and bigger. At the same time, Jason's reptilian eyes were piercing through the Cyclops, whose face was also splattered with Jason's blood. Seeing his own blood, Jason, who was already filled with wrath, couldn't help but switch off the logical part of his brain as the tremendous tidal waves of energy swept through his body. After releasing one of the major seals, which the Chaos Emperor had laid on his Celestia bloodline, Jason's human blood was slowly being overpowered by the Celestia bloodline. Yet, owing to his rage and wrath, his human half was feeling murderously angry, and it only intensified further to see that the Cyclops was still alive and breathing. Wanting to end its life as soon as possible, his aura flared up, sweeping through his body before being released, followed up by the activated stigma, which forced the released energy to be overwhelmed and subdued in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the released chaos energy was forcefully restricted, prevented from leaving his body, and channelized towards his eyes, where it was annexed without Jason realizing. Before, Jason had hoped that the chaos energy, which he had absorbed after the short encounter with the Preactors, would be enough to defeat the Cyclops, but unfortunately, it hadn't been enough. That was not because it had been too little, but rather because the Cyclops had been enveloped by a thin energy layer that didn't seem to belong to it, in the first place. It prevented Jason from making use of his Chaos attribute, and Emperor Eyes like usual, severely restricting his capabilities. Nevertheless, now that the Chaos energy he had was manifold higher, even the thin, protective energy layer around the Cyclops crumbled in front of Jason's wrath. This combined the Chaos energy with his abyssal effect, creating a much stronger force than Jason had ever released. It used up the entire Chaos energy Jason had just released, but before the Cyclops was able to make a single move, it had already entered the depths of the endless void of darkness. In the end, the abyssal effect only worked for a very short moment, but that was because the Cyclops spiral cultivation was also at the peak of the first threshold of the Prisma stage. At the same time, the thin energy layer had been stronger than Jason estimated before his mind had gone blank. Nevertheless, the short moment had been more than enough for Jason, whose body was tearing apart due to the tremendous tidal waves of energy, to appear in front of the Cyclops, barely a moment later. It was as if he had been magically teleported before he emerged in front of the 7-meter-tall opponent, only for half a meter-long claws to grow out of his knuckles, with a rapid speed almost as if they had already been prepared within his forearm. Without thinking twice, Jason allowed Petri's fangs to grow out of his knuckles. This was painful, but so was every single movement he made under the pressure of the enormous energy he was forced to release, in order to survive. He had already lost a leg, and Jason wanted to do nothing but kill the Cyclops, filling his entire being with rage. The thought of turning into an infernal Celestia didn't even cross his mind, and Jason simply let go of his emotions, releasing everything at once. This enlarged the aura he was already releasing, while his stigma began to glow in an even brighter light as the energy coursing through his body was slowly forced to obey his instructions. Dee's body was being invigorated by the unsealed Celestia bloodline through the sheer mass of divine energy provided, which was still slowly spreading through his body. It was strengthening Jason's physique, and the amount was so high and the energy so rich that the surplus was free for Jason to dispose of. As such, he inserted every single trace of energy that had been used to maintain the major seal into Petri's fangs that had grown out of the knuckles on the back of his hands. All of this happened while the Cyclops was still reeling from the after effects of his abyssal effect. It had barely begun to regain its senses, only to see that Jason, or rather, the being it assumed to have been Jason, pierced both of its hands in its one and only eye. Unable to move fast enough, the Cyclops could only release the remaining reserves of its 3 energies at once. Yet, contrary to its belief that Jason was still too weak to break through its defenses, the Cyclops comprehended that Jason's attack was completely different than before, but it was too late. The energy of the Chaos Emperor got intertwined with the Chaos attribute, slowly weakening the Cyclops' defenses. Piercing Petri's fangs deep into the Cyclops' eye, Jason roared out, overexerting his aura that had turned completely crimson in color while his eyes were slowly starting to glow in a blood-red hue. Meanwhile, his entire wrath was channelized in his attack, through which it became stronger and stronger, only for Jason's body to become weaker by the second. The blood loss he suffered was tremendous, yet, Jason didn't even realize anything because the adrenaline that spread through his body was numbing everything else. Only when Petri's claws pierced through the Cyclops' eye did he slowly realize that something was off because his body was faltering all of a sudden. Looking down, he immediately realized what was going on, which made him force the calmed-down energy that coursed through his body, to seal off the bleeding from his leg, without a second of hesitation. Somehow, Jason should have been devastated right now, but after the initial rage, he had become eerily calm as if he knew something others were oblivious to. His entire body ached due to the tidal waves of energy that had almost torn him apart before, yet he had no time to think about the pain as he had to take care of his opponent. With his hands deep inside the head of the Cyclops, Jason didn't even have to think about what he was going to do next. A searing hot flame emerged around his arms and Petri's claws, rapidly spreading through the Cyclops' head. Yet, instead of waiting for everything to end naturally, Jason released a tremendous amount of mana, to flare up Solaris Flame. This caused the Cyclops to succumb to its inevitable fate as its head exploded, brain matter splattering through the surroundings. With the death of the Cyclops, the fight was over, and only a moment after, Jason fell to the ground, where he collapsed, deprived of the energy to continue fighting as his wrath was used up completely. His aura and everything that had forcefully changed retracted, while the deep cut on leg continued bleeding. Jason could only see how the part of his body that had been cut off disintegrated into countless particles before he fainted, falling right into the portal that was next to them, only to hear the artificial intelligence's voice faintly. 10th floor successfully passed. 3 merit points. 100% speed bonus. Healing process has been initiated, unscathed bonus deducted.